Hey everyone, Matt here. I'm super excited to get into this devlog as it's finally time to show you what we've been working on and the things you can do with it. It's really shaping up to be a lot of fun, so let's dive right in. First, let's get a quick rundown of the overall design philosophy of our tool. The main objective is to generate dungeons. Breaking a dungeon down into its simplest component parts, a dungeon itself is made up of multiple floors, which are themselves made up of a collection of rooms. The process of actually building up the dungeon is simply maze generation with a little bit more influence over the parameters. Maze generation works by placing rooms in empty space and then connecting them all with corridors. Several parameters determine what kind of maze you get. For example, whether there is a single path from any given point to another, or if there are loops and branching paths throughout. What our tool is based around is the user first building up a library of rooms that they fill the empty space with, and then controlling the parameters over how they are connected to each other by corridors. Obviously, we can go into a lot more detail, and we will in future devlogs, but hopefully for now, this will give you enough of an understanding of the overall design. So let's dive into what we've started with, the room designer. The idea of the room designer is that you work on a grid to plot out floor space within a single room. The overall width and length of the room is determined by the width and length of the grid, but the area that is actually considered to be the room is the floor space. To create floor space, you left-click on a cell, and to remove it, you right-click. The only caveat to what you can create is that it must be a single, connected block of floor space. We're not designing a whole floor yet, so this tool is only looking for one room at a time. The last feature of the room designer is the ability to resize the grid on the fly. This was one of the more challenging features to implement, as it had a few key requirements, but we'll get to that. So how did we make it? I can't say it again, can I? I've already said it twice. Dive right in! First off, we started with some camera controls. These were relatively straightforward because we had a solid point of reference. Since I'm a 3D artist, I just opened Maya and checked how the camera controls worked in that. And then we systematically implemented each part, so orbiting, panning, and zooming. And then we tweaked them in order to get the feeling right. The first time we tried adding and removing cells, we just had two input boxes for rows and columns, and changing them would just resize the grid to the given number. We later realized that this was only adding on one side of the grid, so I devised a more advanced system that preserves the contents of the grid while allowing the user to add rows or columns on any given side. It was important to come up with a method of validating floor space, because I wanted a way of making sure that the user didn't create any unusable room layouts. Things like singular floating cells or two islands of floor space within the same room could lead to all sorts of complications later on when hooking everything up with corridors and doors. So the best solution right now is to constrain the user to only creating singular islands of floor space. We check this with a simple pathfinding algorithm. Every time we place a new tile, we check that we can find a path from the first tile in the room to every other tile. If we have any tiles left over that do not get connected to the path, we know that we don't have a valid floor space. I wanted to do something more interesting than just changing values in input fields. The whole design philosophy around building this from the ground up is making it more engaging for the user and providing them with instant feedback. This includes everything right down to the way they interact with the UI. In the case of resizing the grid, what I really wanted was arrows that you could physically pick up and drag, so you could actively see and feel out the space you wanted to add or take away from the grid on any given side. This was less straightforward than our initial approach, because it involves putting rows and columns in front of the existing rows and columns, while still maintaining the contents of the grid. And at first, we tried appending code onto our existing method that worked with the input boxes, but then oh god, no! So I put my design cap on and broke down all of the functionality on paper. I need to be able to click and drag the arrows around the outside. I added some disappearing and appearing action so that they didn't clutter up the space by being there all the time. Nope. Damn it. Nailed it. Now that that works, I want new grid tiles to appear when the arrows move. The grid perimeter also needs to redraw to encompass the new tiles, and the arrow positions need to update when the user stops dragging. Things got a little weird at first, but I realised I just had some of my axes the wrong way round, and once I made sure I was adding cells in the correct direction, everything came together really nicely. Now that is a satisfying way to resize the grid. So here's where we've got to so far. We have a grid, which is really easy to resize. We can click to place floor space tiles and right click to remove them. And there's a validation algorithm running in the background that lets us know if we try to create anything that will create problems for us later on down the line. So what are the next steps? The whole thing, of course, needs a visual spruce up. What I'd really like to do is have it looking like an old school paper D&D map, with the hand-drawn hatching in all of the empty space between rooms, and fading off nicely around the outside. Like in this example I found. Oh yeah. It's going to involve some procedural texture selection, based on whether a tile's neighbour is a floor space tile, an empty grid cell, or nothing at all. In terms of the next features to add to design your perfect rooms, we've got a choice between adding doors onto walls and adding elevation. The fun thing about building a room in 3D is that you have an extra dimension to play with, to mark out areas in rooms that are raised or lowered. Imagine designing a room in a sewer, for example, that has two walkways along the sides and a river of flowing sewage through the middle. Classic. And of course, we can't forget that eventually our rooms are going to have to connect to each other, which means doors. Lots of doors. But one thing at a time, so let us know in the comments what you're itching to see first. And that's it for this devlog. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like the video, and if you don't want to miss out on the next one, make sure to subscribe to the channel to get updated when the next one comes out. If you just can't wait for more, try following us on social media, where we're going to post some teaser updates on our progress until the next devlog comes out. You can find links to our channels in the description below. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next one.